Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to B-Side Sydney 2024. We're excited here to provide two dedicated talk rooms throughout today. This is the first theatre. Lunch will be held on level 3, Capture the Flag, Careers, and the second talk theatre will be on level 5, and workshops and networking later this evening will be on level 6. Without further ado, let's start by introducing our first speakers. Harriet Farlow is the CEO of AI security company Ralevska Security Labs and a PhD candidate in machine learning security. She is the creative mind behind the YouTube channel Harriet Hacks. And Chantelle Ralevska is the founder and CEO of Cyber, a startup delivering cybersecurity consulting services and security awareness training to businesses across Australia. Presenting a talk titled On Your Ocean's 11 Team, we're the AI guys, technically girls. Please welcome Harriet and Chantelle.
A ransomware group, a massive cyber
MGM
Resorts
has been
has
hit
been
by
hit by a cyber.
These are out in the casino. Gamble at this point. Painful.
It's September 11th, 2020. Over at the MGM, Vegas, something just isn't right. We noticed that the casino's computer system comes offline. Their ATM machine, and as a result, the casinos begin.
We might just skip that. It was working in the test, but of course now we're live, it's not working. Doesn't that always happen? Basically, the end of the video exposes who the real hackers were behind the MGM casino breach. And it was in fact Harriet and myself. So spoiler alert. Fortunately for us, Black Cat, Scattered Spider, and a bunch of other APT groups willingly took the blame for the attack. So here we are 1 year later, ready to target our next victim. A bit of introduction into who I am. My name is Chantelle, and I'm incredibly passionate about the people side of cybersecurity. That is so distracting. I can hear myself. Anyway, so I run Cyber. We're very much focused on cybersecurity awareness and training. So reshaping how people view cybersecurity, because ultimately it's not just something that we're responsible for in the cybersecurity industry, but people outside of IT, the rest of the organization. So really empowering those people to understand cyber and be passionate about it like all of us are. So today we're going to focus very much on the cyber attack kill chain and the psychology of cybersecurity and the end user versus just the technical components. I'll hand over to you, Harriet.
Thank you, Chantelle. Everyone can hear me okay? All right. We don't need cybersecurity incidents when we already have bad internet connection, so that's okay. Thank you everyone for being here on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. in Meadowbank. We really appreciate it. The first time I delivered my portion of the talk was at DEF CON this year, which was by far the scariest, most stressful thing I've ever done. So being able to deliver like the content to people like you and an audience in a venue where I sort of think back to B-Side Sydney a few years ago as one of the first talks in security that I did. So it feels really special and really nice to be here with you this early in the morning. But my name is Harriet Farlow, as we heard in the intro. I run the AI security company Ralevska Security Labs, and my PhD is in machine learning security. And I also have content on Harriet Hacks on YouTube and other socials that's a bit average, but it's getting better. So if you stick with it, it'll eventually get better. But I've been working at the intersection of AI and security for about a decade. I started in consulting, mostly on defense projects. I spent a year living in Darwin doing data remediation in the Navy, which is fascinating. I worked at a startup in New York. I worked in the government. My latest role before starting the company was as an acting technical director at the Australian Signals Directorate. So I've very much come from seeing the problem space of all of the ways that AI can introduce risks into our businesses, our organizations, our societies. And now the work I do at Ralevska is trying to, stop those risks from coming about. building the suspense. Okay, so I originally had this idea for a talk of wanting to focus on casinos because we all love a good heist movie, and any good sort of security related topic, it helps to link it back to some sort of narrative. So can I get a show of hands if you're familiar with the Ocean's franchise of heist films? Great, okay. And we all get the idea anyway. Basically, there's a group of cool people, so that's us too, trying to get into a casino. We use all sorts of different means to get in there and steal the information that we're looking for. And in this case, we're focusing specifically on the cybersecurity, the AI security element. So, oh, sorry, Chantelle.
That's okay.
Should swap places. So these are our objectives for today. We're going to rob the casino, just like we did in Vegas before. We're going to focus on looking at some OSINT and social engineering that Chantelle is going to be looking at. I'll be looking at AI security, so how to actually compromise or hack the AI system itself. Looking at facial recognition in particular, but really any computer vision system is vulnerable to this kind of attack. And then we'll be looking at the implication of deepfakes, and the idea is to profit, of course, but also to actually come away with some lessons that we can apply to our own organizations or our own teams or our own roles as well. So some disclaimers. Obviously, the presentation and the narrative is fictional. It is based out of real research and real attacks, but that's not necessarily the point of how we're presenting it to you. We want it to be interesting. And we did work with a number of organizations to conduct this research in different ways. So we're very grateful for them to be able to do that. So I want to start off with some statistics just to paint the picture, because we're focusing on a couple of different intersections of AI and security. Chantelle is very much looking at how AI can be used for security purposes. And then I tend to focus on the security of AI systems themselves and looking at AI as an attack surface. So you might be interested to know that in 2024, 77% of organizations actually reported AI-related security incidents. And this kind of statistic is scary because it's very real and impacting businesses. And I know as security professionals, you're already keen to all sorts of security risks, but most of the time I'm speaking to people who aren't from security, and especially when it comes to AI systems and whether they represent real security targets, people just don't care. It's totally disregarded a lot of the time, but it is real. And so I have a prize for the people who can guess what percentage increase this statistic was from 2023. And because obviously you have to have a challenge coin. So the first two people who come to me with the closest correct answers, based on what I remember, either after the talk, depending on time and not wanting to take up time from the next speakers, or during the break, will get a challenge coin. So please do that. But I'm going to let you take it from here, Chantelle.
Awesome, yeah. So we're using the MGM hack as the basis for our attack on our next target, which is another casino here in Australia. So for context on the MGM hack, does anyone know a lot about how it actually occurred? Yeah, a few people. So Harriet and myself, using our favorite platform, LinkedIn, were able to identify a target who was an IT specialist with privileged access. So we used OSINT to gain as much information on this target as possible. And then we called the MGM help desk and were on the phone to them for about 20 minutes, back and forth, trickling pieces of information that we knew about our IT specialist and getting them to reset the password, which of course gave us access to the MGM's network, because this IT specialist had access to both Azure tenant environments and Okta as well. So once we were in, there's reports that we stole about 6 terabytes of data, including full names, dates of birth, passport information, social security numbers. The list goes on. And once the casino detected that we were on the network, that's when they shut down their Okta sync servers as well as essential infrastructure, which was the cause of, you would have seen in the video, even though it was really choppy, the slot machines not working, digital room keys stopped working, the reservation system, and that was because of their reaction to the attack. So it cost the MGM $100 million and they were shut down for about 10 days. And despite that, they refused to pay our ransom. So the saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas wasn't so true because it actually impacted MGM resorts in New York, Ohio, Michigan, and so on. Now, this attack is definitely not unique. It sits at the nexus of several attack trends, one of which being the increasing targeting of people. And we know that 98% of all cyber attacks are the result of social engineering, which is why empowering the end user is so critical. So these are the 3 stages of our attack today. At first, of course, we want to infiltrate the network. So infiltrating through reconnaissance and social engineering. The second is escalation. We want to gather credentials so that we can gather more data. And then the third is, of course, exfiltrating that data without detection. We are using OSINT for reconnaissance. So obviously reconnaissance is so critical, and a lot of sophisticated threat actors leverage reconnaissance in order to make their social engineering attempts so much more sophisticated that you as the victim and the subject are so much more likely to click. So we're using OSINT. OSINT, or open source intelligence, is the process of gathering publicly available information, either online through the surface web or the dark web, or offline as well, and then using that to answer specific questions or to form specific conclusions. There are multiple tools that you can use for OSINT. Social media is a prime example. We've got internet search engines, the dark web, platforms like breached forums, public records, and government records. Now, why OSINT? So traditionally used in law enforcement, OSINT has now expanded into a range of different industries, organizations, being used for a range of different purposes. So OSINT helps you to identify vulnerabilities, identify potential security threats. And then on the other side of that, as an organization, it helps you to actually bolster those threats, either personally or professionally. So OSINT can be used for, we do OSINT at Cyber. We do it for executive protection, but it's also used for a range of other purposes like theft prevention, internal investigations, cyber threat intelligence. The list goes on and on. And it's such a valuable tool that actually they estimate by 2033 that the OSINT industry will be worth $58 billion. I had to remind myself. So obviously the dark side of OSINT is that anything that can be found by us as cybersecurity practitioners can also be found by threat actors. So we are mirroring on from the MGM hack. We're leveraging LinkedIn, and luckily for us, our casino doesn't have nowhere near as many employees as the MGM resorts did. So we're able to locate our target very simply, which you can't really see on the screen, but his name is Henry Golan. So he's the Director of Security and Surveillance at this casino. I thought I put my laptop on Do Not Disturb. I'll do that again. Oh, going back. So when we want to do recon on our target, there's a few different pieces of information that are really valuable in profiling that target. Of course, things like emails, phone numbers, dates of birth, passwords, home address, and family, where their kids go to school, all of these pieces of information that typically leveraging social media is really easy to gather. So using a data broker platform like Contact Out, I was able to find Henry's personal and corporate email address basically instantly, as well as his phone number. Now, what I'm doing with the email address is I feel like once you have an email address, there's so many different pieces of information that you can find from that. And of course, passwords are one of them. And exposed.lol is this platform that I have a screenshot of here. And it's really similar to Have I Been Pwned, in the sense that if you put your email address in, it will tell you what breaches that email is in. However, unlike Have I Been Pwned, it actually exposes the passwords used. So you don't even need to, as a threat actor, you don't even need to purchase the data breaches to gain access to this person's passwords. So from that, we were able to find several credentials linked to Henry. Now, social media, an attacker's prime hunting ground for information. So Henry, we're validating that this is actually Henry because a lot of the pieces of information linked to his LinkedIn. So for example, where he went to school, that he lives in Canberra, and so on. And from his social media, I've been able to gather so much information. So I've located who his 2 children are, Lily and Grace. I got a bit more information about his interests. He loves caravanning and he recently sold a caravan. And his daughter posted about his 55th birthday, which you can't see either. But yeah, we know his date of birth as well. So all of these pieces of information just by scouring social media. And actually, that's a really interesting trend in the UK as well, is that they're delivering training not just for individuals in an organisation, but actually for family. And a lot of the time, the information that exposes us, our dates of birth, where we live, all of this sort of information is information that is posted by our family or our friends. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. So yeah, that's a really interesting trend out of the UK. Now we want to find Henry's home address because that's one of the pieces of the puzzle that is missing. So there's a range of different ways you can find a home address leveraging OSINT, things like DA approvals. But in this instance, Henry is actually a runner. So we've got his phone number and we've put that into Strava to be able to locate his home, because a lot of people that use Strava, well, Strava by default is public. So often that can actually expose your home address. So we've been able to find where Henry lives as well. So we've got all of these pieces of information. We've got his passwords, his contact details. We know his family dynamic, and we also know where he lives. So using all of this, there are 2 different attack vectors that we can execute. The first is compromising Henry's home Wi-Fi network. So because I know where Henry lives, I was recently in Canberra, I thought, how convenient. I'm going to go to Henry's house, sit outside for a few hours and try to crack his home Wi-Fi network. So to execute this attack, I used the AirCrack NG suite and an Alpha network adapter, which I left at home. I should have brought it with me. And with both of those, I'm able to see all the networks within vicinity by being outside of Henry's house. And of course, I only care about Henry's network. So I'm able to locate his BSS ID, which is his network name, because Henry's network name was Golan Family, which makes it really easy. And the whole objective with this is to crack that 4-way handshake, which is basically the encrypted password that connects your device to the access point. So using the Alpha Network adapter, I do what is called a deauthentication attack, which sends an authentication frame to the network, forcing all devices on that network to deauthenticate and then automatically reauthenticate. And in the process, I've been able to intercept and capture that 4-way handshake, which enables me to go home and then crack those packets. And this happens in the background. It's a glitch that no one would even notice or recognize. So once I've gone home, I've cracked those packets, I've been able to gain access to Henry's network. And from that, there's so many things that I can do. I can sniff all of Henry's traffic and decrypt everything. I can conduct a man-in-the-middle attack and compromise other devices on the network, including Internet of Things devices, enabling me to persistently listen to everything that goes on in Henry's house. I can compromise his family's, his kids' devices. But most importantly, I can steal his credentials and his session cookies, which enables me to gain access to the to the casino and impersonate Henry to steal data and access apps. So, of course, home networks are nowhere near as secure as corporate networks, and it does make it a lot easier for an attacker to compromise. And typically, Wi-Fi credentials are those typical generic configurations. How many of us in the room have actually changed our username and password on our Wi-Fi network, making them so much easier to crack as well? Now, I'm looking for the path of least resistance. So say I'm not in Australia, I didn't visit Canberra. The second attack vector that I can execute is a targeted phishing campaign. So there's 2 ways that I can do this. I can either attach a malicious attachment with macros that will run a malicious code when opened, or I can use a malicious URL, which would conduct a man-in-the-browser attack, because through our OSINT, we also found that Henry is operating on a vulnerable browser. So because I know Henry loves caravans, I've crafted this beautiful caravan newsletter about secondhand caravans in the area, actually very close to Henry's home address. And when we run these targeted phishing campaigns that are so highly curated to the person, 9 times out of 10, people click on them. So I'm fairly confident that in this instance, Henry is going to click. And I've decided to opt for a malicious link because now Microsoft alerts users when enabling macros, which makes that attack vector less stealthy. Which probably why URLs are now the most popular delivery mechanism for cybercrime as well. So once Henry clicks on my phishing email, he's going to be redirected to this Caravan website. And in the background, it's going to execute a malicious JavaScript exploit that gives me complete control over his browser. And he's not even going to recognize that this is happening in the background. And of course, browsers have so many permissions. So once you're in the browser, there's so much that you can do. You can move laterally. You can install malware onto the device, install a keylogger and track his keystrokes. And most importantly, again, steal credentials, steal session cookies to be able to impersonate Henry and access the casino's assets. Now I'll hand over to you, Harriet. If you want to swap with me, we can.
Swap.
Yeah.
Okay, we're changing tack a little bit now. So we have all this useful information about Henry, and now we're going to exploit it, but we're going to exploit it in a slightly different way. You're right, I can keep hearing the people behind me. Okay, so I wanted to do a bit of research into casinos in general. So we have this information about Henry. Now we actually want to be able to walk into a casino and gain some extra information there. And I was sort of interested in the AI uses in casinos. So I went into this project and I sort of assumed that artificial intelligence would mostly be used by casinos for gameplay monitoring. And I was actually surprised. I found that the most important use of artificial intelligence in the casino setting was facial recognition and person detection through the facial recognition. So, casinos might be looking for known persons of interest, but they would do that by putting that person's information into the sort of tool that they use, and then it connects to all of the cameras in the casino. And if that person is identified, then they're flagged, and the security person goes and takes them out. So we now have our target. The most useful target in a casino format is the facial recognition detection. So we're not using AI for hacking, just to clarify. We're actually looking at how to hack the AI system itself. We're looking at how to disrupt or manipulate the facial recognition AI system. So you might have heard of this concept called adversarial machine learning. And the idea is basically that you can disrupt, deceive, or disclose information from a machine learning system, a cool part of an artificial intelligence, by adding specially crafted patterns or materials to the object itself. So in this example, this is thinking of an autonomous vehicle use case that's using its computer vision system to be able to identify stop signs. And so the first stop sign we see is a normal stop sign. It's able to recognize it is one with 99% accuracy. And then the next one is coated in a special adversarial paint or adversarial pattern so that it instead recognizes a sports ball at 80%. And this has been shown to work in lab environments. It's often been seen as a bit theoretical, a bit academic, but the field has moved quite a lot in the last few years. And recently, I think it was a few weeks ago actually, a research group published a report on all the ways that they were able to hack real Tesla vehicles so that they couldn't recognize lane markers, stop signs, all this kind of stuff, but in the real world. This is the original adversarial example. So if you're not already familiar with this field, this is the picture you should take note of, and then you speak to AML people and they will think that you're one of them. Basically, this panda is superimposed with adversarial noise. The noise is not random, but it's crafted based specifically on the target model that someone is trying to compromise, so that when it's superimposed, we instead recognize a gibbon. The AI system recognizes a gibbon instead. So there's now over 100 different attacks like this since that original example was created in 2013. And they happen at all stages of the artificial intelligence sort of attack cycle. So if you think about an AI and its core technical capability being a machine learning model, there are lots of different kinds of machine learning models. Some do computer vision, so being able to recognize objects in the environment. Some do natural language processing, so being able to understand humans, generate text, like transformer-based large language models. There are so many different kinds of attacks that can do different things depending on the model architecture at different stages of the life cycle, whether it's in the training process or the inference phase, which is sort of when you're making a prediction or generating an output. And a good way of thinking about them is either disrupt, deceive, or disclosure-based attacks. I don't want to try and talk through, a dozen or more different kinds of attacks. But you can think about them being able to do one of three things. They either disrupt the model so it doesn't work as intended. This is kind of like a DDoS attack in cyber world, but for an AI system. It could be a deceive-based attack. So like the stop sign example, you're deceiving that model so it doesn't just not work, but you want it to instead recognize a specific speed sign, for example, or a disclosure-based attack. So you're leaking private or confidential information about the training data or the model parameters. Imagine being able to steal, all the model weights of GPT-3 or GPT-4, which has been done from earlier forms of the model. So people have been able to replicate GPT-2, for example. So if we think about the idea of trying to hack an AI system, the idea of hacking a model has existed as long as models have themselves. That Panda Gibbon example was released in a paper in 2013, and it exploits the inherent architecture of the machine learning process. But the idea of algorithm hacking, so just hacking an algorithm, has a lot of history to it. And a really cool casino-based example is this one involving random number generators. So in the 1990s, Ron Harris, who was employed by the Nevada Gaming Authority Board, was able to get access to the seed behind the random number generator at some of the Keno machines and was able to, from his hotel room and using a sort of person based in the casino, steal $150,000, which in this economy doesn't sound worth it, honestly. But I guess they could have taken more, but they were found. Another cool example is card counting itself. So the idea of, a blackjack game is an algorithm, right? You have a specific way of playing that can be more strategic. And it's a game that is inherently advantageous to the house. So any game at the casino has between a 2 and 25% favor towards the casino, and the 25% cap is for slot machines, and that's only imposed because of law. Otherwise, it'd be higher. But something like a blackjack game is the lowest, of around 2%. And if you play perfect strategy, you keep it to that minimum 2%. And then if you're able to implement card counting on top of that, then you can lower that even further. So that's a way of hacking that algorithm too. Now, the idea of adversarial machine learning is taking that a step further from just hacking an algorithm to actually hacking the way that machine learning models work in the first place, which at its very core, despite all the different kinds of machine learning models we have these days and how complicated they're getting, you're basically taking input data and then you're finding a way to map that to a prediction that is as accurate as possible. And the way that you map that is by building an architecture, a model architecture. It's trained over many iterations very quickly. And the way that it's able to go from sort of not well performing to very accurate is by the idea of a gradient. So you're constantly tracking this gradient function, which indicates how accurate a model is over the training course. So you go from, if you're thinking about this as a sort of hyperdimensional space that's detailed by all of the parameters in a model, you go from this area of red, which is inaccurate, and then over many training iterations, it becomes more accurate and sort of moves into this blue area. So the idea of adversarial machine learning is that by using the information about the gradients, instead of making the model more accurate, you're identifying what you need to do to the model, what kind of data you need to feed to the model to make it less accurate, to move over a prediction boundary. So this is how it might work in a convolutional neural network. So you might have your image, you go through the training process, there's feature extraction, classification, and then you're trying to predict at the end if you're looking at, for example, Sarah Connor. Now, most of the ways these attacks work is by perturbing the actual target itself. So in that stop sign example, you're actually changing the stop sign. In the panda example, you're actually changing the image of the panda. but that can be a constraint for real world applications. And I wanted to experiment with, instead of actually changing the thing, by adding other objects around that thing to be able to cause a misclassification that are sort of dynamic, but you don't actually have to change the object itself. So I created this method called distributed adversarial regions. So you can distribute the adversarial regions around the target to cause a disrupt or a deceive attack, to either make the model not work or to make it classify or predict a specific thing based on something you've predetermined. And because I used to work in defense, the original idea I was sort of imagining was like if you could have these adversarial buoys around a sort of military platform to act as camouflage. So by placing these objects, and no, I know they're not real buoys, but you know, forgive me, I didn't have enough funding to put real buoys around a U-boat or something. But you could cause another machine learning model to look at that military platform and basically not see it's there, or maybe have it predict that it's like a sailboat instead of a military platform. So I wanted to apply this to the casino context. And I'll talk through this code, which is not always the most exciting demonstration to have. But basically, if we're looking at a facial recognition model, I wanted to see how I could add objects to my face, for example, so that the model that's looking at me either would just not recognize me or would maybe think that I'm actually someone else and be convinced that I'm someone else. So basically what I'm doing is I tested a lot of different open source facial recognition models. These tend to be celebrity classifiers and things that I then fine tune to recognize my face. I take all of this information about the embedding space of that model. So this is understanding basically what makes it accurate. Using this information, I can understand what noise I would need to add to specific regions, sort of optimized regions of this image to make it less accurate. And then I have to figure out, you know, what is the boundary of inaccurate before it's too wild or too obvious. I'm just going to skip through this because we're sort of we started a bit late, so I'm not tracking for time. But basically, the best way of hacking a facial recognition model, right, is jewelry. There's not many other objects that I would be able to change around my face, but something like these adversarial patterns encoded in earrings is something that does work. And so I tested these, and this is a day it was a cold day in Canberra. I'm from Canberra, I should have done my hair, but this is me approaching a facial recognition model. There's no match found. And then if I add these sort of adversarial earrings, this is just digital, mind you, there'll be a match found. So depending, of course, on whether I want this to be a disrupt-based attack, so maybe not recognizing me or a specific target or having it recognize someone else, we're able to sort of hack the casino, I guess. But what does it really mean to hack the casino in a facial recognition context? What we actually found was that for all the open source models we tested, it reduced the classification confidence by 40.4%. So usually in a machine learning model, you'd have a boundary of maybe 80% that says, or 90%, that says if the confidence that this face is Harriet is 95%, it's over that boundary, then it's a yes. And if it's maybe 80%, it could be a no. So this is how it can be quite different between cyber and AI-based attacks, because AI systems are inherently probabilistic. So the idea of hacking an AI system is more about changing that classification boundary. And this, of course, is a computer vision-based attack. Usually when we hear about AI hacking, it's in chatbots and prompt engineering and prompt injection, things like that. But I think this is a really underexplored topic that's also really important, because computer vision is used all around us in our phones, surveillance systems that are used for all sorts of purposes, airports now for security monitoring. This is something important to think about. I'll hand back over to you, Chantelle.
I might just stand here too, because that is so distracting. So moving on to deep fakes, which ties in nicely to what Harriet was talking about. And actually there was research that came out by Gartner recently that within a matter of 2 years, 30% of maybe it was, I think 50% of organizations will no longer trust facial recognition as well, which is really interesting. So a lot of the context around deepfake has been in regards to scamming organizations or scamming individuals into giving away X number of dollars. But what I want to explore today is the use of deepfakes to disrupt political and economic landscapes, which I think is an under-discussed topic as well. So the World Economic Forum ranks AI-generated misinformation and disinformation as the biggest threat to our humanity over the next 2 years, which is pretty scary. I'll go back. So yeah, for a lot of the organizations that we probably work for, a lot of larger organizations, something like deepfake technology can be used to impact that organization's market value. So for example, creating a deepfake of a CEO of a publicly listed company saying something incredibly outlandish so that the value of that company goes down and then the malicious adversary can purchase shares at a lower price. And so that's what we want to use deepfake for in this context is to actually deepfake the CEO of this casino and tell people to stop going there so that they can start spending their money at other casinos for when we target another casino next, which is what we've been doing because we went to Singapore, we went to Canberra, we're just on a casino hacking journey. So that's our intention. So I've created this deepfake very quickly, so it's not perfect, but it's of the CEO of our casino, Nicole Lidman, if it plays, which it probably...
But when we do work, we then have to go, it's going to be safe for you too.
Oh, it's not working. It's okay. I will skip over that. It's okay. Anyway, we're just having lots of technical difficulties this morning. So then how can we protect our organization? Well, the first one is around tailored education and training. So many organizations have generic training for all staff. And we know that each employee's relationship with cybersecurity is very different. And if we look at the MGM attack on the IT help desk, having tailored training that the roles like an IT help desk know how to detect social engineering, that they don't just need a full name and pieces of information to actually validate that this person works in this organization and is who they say they are. The second is, of course, being careful what we share on social media. Obviously, social media is so ripe for stealing data and being able to target you so specifically. The next one is don't trust Wi-Fi. Even at home, I don't do my online banking on my Wi-Fi, and always update your browser because attackers exploit vulnerable browsers and they can sit on there forever and you wouldn't even notice. And then the last one is beware of tailored phishing campaigns. I recently went to a restaurant and then the next day I received an email saying, thanks so much for coming to the restaurant last night. Here's a 10% discount code. And I looked into it and I realized that wasn't even from the restaurant. So a lot of these online booking platforms, they're either compromised or they're selling data or they're doing both. And tailored phishing campaigns are becoming so much more rampant. So really being careful of that as well. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Chantelle. We're on time. So I just want to end by saying, take AI security seriously. A lot of the research that we're doing as part of my work now is actually uncovering incidents related to specific AI security attacks that go undiscovered because people just aren't aware it's a real thing. But it happens a lot more than you realize, and it has significant consequences for organizations and their personnel in and of itself. And now we actually have laws and compliance obligations through ISO and NIST standards related specifically to AI security, so ensuring that AI systems are robust. So if there wasn't an incentive before for organizations to do security of AI, now at least there'll be fines to make sure that they do that. But I think it's a great space to get in. So as security professionals, I really encourage you to donate your expertise to the AI space, because as a previous data scientist, there often is a surprising lack of intersection between the security and the data science disciplines. And data scientists are the ones building these models, but often don't know a whole lot about security principles. So I think it's fantastic that you're here. Please lend your expertise to AI, take it seriously, help your organizations understand what to do, and contribute. Yeah. So on that note,
thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Hope you enjoyed the presentation.